Yes, there is technically WebKit, which is mainly used as the basis for Safari, but putting that one aside, most of the web is run by two different web engines, one of them way bigger than the other. The first one being Blink. This is the basis for Chromium, Google Chrome, and then every browser built off of Chromium. Things like Brave, OperaGX, and a ton of others. The second one being Gecko. This is the basis for Firefox, and the few browsers based on Firefox, things like Florp, LibreWolf, and a couple of others. Now, in the past, there were more things out there. Even though it did suck, and even though it was only being used internally by Microsoft, there were things like Edge HTML based off of the older Trident, used for Edge and Internet Explorer respectively. But even Edge has been absorbed into the monolith that is Blink and Chromium. Now, of course, these are not the only engines out there. You may know of one called Servo. This started as a Mozilla project until in 2020 it was abandoned, and now it's being developed as an external project, and it is getting funding, it is getting development, but probably not at the same pace it would have been if all of Mozilla's effort was focused on getting it done. And yes, of course, there are things like WebKit, and WebKit does exist on Linux as well, most of the time being used as WebKit GTK, and maybe all of us could put our effort behind supporting WebKit-based browsers. But there is another option which people have bugged me to talk about for a really, really long time, and honestly, I don't know why I hadn't done so before. Just for one reason or another, it just didn't make it onto my list of topics. And today, thanks to an early tip from its lead developer Andreas Kling, we are going to talk about it. Because now, there is a really exciting announcement from the Ladybird Browser project. But before we get into this, I'm sure that most of you have probably just never heard of the Ladybird Browser, don't know where it came from, don't know who started it, don't know just how long it's been in development for, or why anyone would want to go and use this. So let's go and do a bit of a quick rundown. Going back to 2018, the lead developer Andreas Kling started a project called Serenity OS. Now, unlike some projects out there that put OS in their name, it's not just a Linux distro, it's actually its own separate OS doing its own separate thing. It is still a Unix-like system, it still follows POSIX, and it still has a monolithic kernel, but it is not Linux. And this project was kind of started as like a hobby project just to explore operating system development, and since then has evolved into having a relatively healthy developer community, even though the project is still very much experimental and is still very much just, hey, we want to mess around writing an operating system. Now, being an operating system, it's obviously going to need some sort of web browser, but Serenity OS has an interesting rule about using external code. They don't want to use any third-party code, which, if you ask me, makes things pretty limited when it comes to supporting a web browser. Basically, your only option is make a new one, not make a new one based on an existing engine, but make a new one from the ground up. And when Ladybird began, it was just a simple HTML viewer, but since then has evolved still into a fairly minor one that has a lot of features that need to be worked on, but one that is a full-fledged web browser. And towards the start of last month, Andreas posted this: I'm forking Ladybird and stepping down as Serenity OS BDFL. And this wasn't a case of, hey, there was some drama, there was all of this stuff that made him want to step away. The reason why he stepped away is actually a fairly sensible reason. He was working on Serenity OS, and then he started working on Ladybird. And Ladybird kinda took up most of his time, and he wasn't really working on the other project as much as he should have been. And both of them had existed under this same banner. So it didn't really make any sense to have a whole operating system and a whole browser all existing in the same space. And Serenity OS had developed a fairly large group of developers who want to keep working on it, so he felt like, okay, I'm not doing a great job as the BDFL anyway, my focus is on something else, so why don't I step away and just let these guys focus on what they want to focus on? And that's basically what happened here. Now, this shift in focus isn't something that just happened overnight. It kind of started back in 2022 when Ladybird became a cross-platform browser, of course supporting Serenity OS, but also supporting Linux and macOS. When that happened, the focus basically entirely shifted to just supporting Ladybird. Now, after stepping down from the Serenity OS project, it is dropping support for Serenity OS and is just focusing on Linux and macOS going forward. And the Serenity OS guys are going to be left to do just what they want to do with the project, which is basically creating something that is like a 90s inspired operating system, which is not the thing that I particularly want to be using, but I can certainly respect the goal. Now, to really focus on the browser, I mentioned something big is happening. Announcing the Ladybird Browser Initiative. Ladybird uses a brand new engine based on web standards without borrowing any code from other browsers. It started as a humble HTML viewer for the Serenity OS hobby project, but has since then grown into a full cross-platform browser project supporting Linux, macOS, and other Unix-like systems. We can already do some of our daily browsing with Ladybird, like managing GitHub issues and pull requests, commenting on Hacker News. The browser is improving every day as our community of contributors are actively fixing bugs and adding features. But it's still very far from finished. We want to turn Ladybird into a browser you can use every day for all your web-related tasks. It should be fast, stable, and support web standards and protect your privacy. A browser for you. There is a reason why we don't have as many browsers as there are tiling window managers on Linux. Building a browser is hard. Building a browser that anybody wants to use is even harder, let alone building something that is completely independent of the existing browser engines out there and isn't just another fork of Chromium. In order to help us achieve this goal, we've created the Ladybird Browser Initiative, a US 501c3 nonprofit tax-exempt status pending to drive work on the browser and make it easier for supporters of all shapes and sizes to sponsor development. And they already do have a really big sponsor. Shopify, a platinum sponsor, is $100,000, and they have a number of silver sponsors and also a bronze sponsor. Now, Shopify being a sponsor is not a new thing for the project, and when it happened, Andreas made a post about it, and there was a quote from Mike Shaver, a distinguished engineer at Shopify, on why they decided to back us. Ladybird is a love letter to the web, and proof that open technologies enable innovation by organizations of all sizes. Shopify grew up on these technologies and proudly contributes to them. We're excited to add Ladybird to the set of projects we support. And you know what? Honestly, it doesn't matter the reason they want to support it. $100,000 is reason enough. I think anybody would accept that. And when they are doing these donations, they are unrestricted donations. They are not a contract saying that you are going to work on a specific thing. It is just like a donation to any other project. Now, a bigger donation might encourage you to work on certain things more, but it's not a binding contract that says you have to do it. As of the founding of the nonprofit, there's going to be 2 members of the board of directors. The first one being Andreas Kling, the president, the project founder, and lead developer. In the past, he worked on Safari, WebKit for Nokia, and also KHTML, which was a web engine that came out of the KDE project. Also, we have Chris Wanstrath, the secretary and treasurer, who currently has an unannounced game engine, is involved in Null Games, the Computer History Museum, and in the past was a GitHub co-founder and former CEO. I want to say back in like 2013, 2014 era, so it's been quite a while, but this is a really impressive resume. Now, you may not know him as this name, you may instead recognize the name Defunct. And there's a good reason why you might recognize that name. He was that former GitHub CEO who earlier this year got temporarily banned from GitHub. Now, as needed, more people will be added to the board of directors, and more people are probably going to be added sometime later this year. Now, as we established, building a browser is hard. And yes, you can go and use it today. All of the code is available on GitHub. It's available under a BSD2 clause license. It's all open source to go and use. But it wouldn't even be considered like an alpha at this point. This is very much like a pre-alpha. This is, hey, we are trying to get something that works as a web browser, but it's very far away from being something which even should be used by anyone who is just not a developer on the project. There is a year set for the alpha. It's a long way away, but 2026 for early adopters. So even at this point, they are not considering it to be completely ready, just more ready to go and try out. Now, whilst Andreas is definitely the main developer on the project, and does do a lot of the development work, he is certainly not the only one. There is a lot of additional contributors, but he's also not the only paid developer. So right now, if we go here, they have 4 paid full-time engineers working on Ladybird, with plans to hire another 3 more people that are starting soon. As they grow, they would like to grow the team at a pace that makes sense, where you don't have to just fire everybody if things go badly. But 7 people working on a browser, yes, that is a very small team in the context of browsers, but maybe by 2026, it's actually gonna be a thing. Now, paying for 7 full-time engineers is incredibly expensive, meaning that a lot of money is going to need to come into the project, or at least if they want to move at the pace they're currently moving. If they want to slow down, obviously you would need less, but I really hope that doesn't happen. Now, having moved outside of Serenity, there is no longer the requirement not to use third-party libraries. The goal is to still build an engine specifically for Ladybird, but if they need to support a specific file type and things like that, they are now not opposed to making use of existing libraries, and when there are libraries in place to do things they want to do, there are going to be cases where those do get used. But if they can actually do this, which is going to be a really difficult task, I want to see it happen. I really want to see where this goes, and I really want to see there be another way to use the web that isn't Chromium and that isn't Firefox. Because, look, whilst Chromium is much, much worse, Mozilla gets away with a lot of stuff just because their competition is Google. There has been one person in my Discord constantly bugging me to talk about Ladybird and to talk with Andreas Kling. So here you go. Here is your video on Ladybird, and maybe there is something else in store on another channel of mine if you just wait a little bit longer. No promises, but we'll see how schedules align and see what can be done. I don't know whether or not I should have high hopes for this project, but I do certainly wish it the best of luck, and really do hope that something actually comes out of it, and we actually get something that is truly standalone, that isn't tied to some major company, because that would be nice. Yes, Servo is its own separate thing now, but nobody really cares about Servo. But what do you think? Did you know about the Ladybird project? Have you followed anything done by Andreas Kling? And do you like web browsers? I don't know. So if you like the video, go like the video. Also, let me know your thoughts down below. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, and Brodie pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and keep your eye on the podcast.
like this.